In 18th century England, one woman's nightmare turned into a chilling saga of betrayal, death, and dark secrets that defied the era's social norms. How did Elizabeth Barry, a modest woman, become enmeshed in a web of horror that shocked her community? Prepare to unravel the haunting true crime case that reveals the brutal depths of human cruelty and the fragile line between innocence and guilt. Elizabeth Barry's tale begins in the grim surroundings of early 18th century England, in a quiet village nestled amidst the rolling countryside. Life was hard and unforgiving, especially for women with few resources like Elizabeth. Little is known about her early years. Records show she was born around 1705 into a family of modest means, with the Barry name tied to local laborers and petty farmers. Though humble, Elizabeth was reputed to be diligent and resilient, needed qualities to survive in those harsh times. By her mid-20s, she lived with her aging mother and younger siblings, partially supporting the household by selling needlework. Opportunities for women were extremely limited then, and Elizabeth's prospects, though bleak, were not unusual. On the surface, she was a woman like many others, blending quietly into the rhythm of rural life. Yet beneath this ordinary veneer, forces were gathering that would irrevocably change her fate and tear her world apart. The story takes a dark turn in the summer of 1729, when Elizabeth met one Thomas Harrington, a man twice her age with a questionable reputation. His arrival in the village was marked by whispered rumors was a drifter, perhaps a deserter, rumored to carry debts and dangers with him. Thomas quickly ingratiated himself with the locals, often seen at the tavern, speaking in low tones and brandishing a disarming smile. Attracted by his charm and the promise of security, Elizabeth's mother approved of the match despite misgivings from neighbors. For the first time in years, Elizabeth glimpsed a chance at some semblance of stability. Their courtship, though brief, sparked hope, though no one could foresee the grim events it would unleash. The wedding was hastily arranged in the autumn of that year, marked by a modest ceremony and a small gathering of villagers. At first, the union seemed to bring Elizabeth a degree of peace. However, the fragile calm shattered abruptly. Within weeks, Thomas's violent temper became apparent. His drinking spiraled, and his outbursts of rage scared Elizabeth and her family. Neighbors overheard shouts and cries from the small cottage where Elizabeth now lived. Hidden behind closed doors was a world of fear and control. Elizabeth's once hopeful future darkened quickly, and she became an isolated figure, trapped in the confines of her own home and marriage. Her attempts to seek help were met with the era's indifference. Domestic abuse was largely ignored in that time, considered a private matter. The turning point came in the cold winter months of 1729, when an ominous incident occurred. Elizabeth was found wandering near the woods, disheveled and bleeding from a head wound. She claimed Thomas had attacked her with a broken bottle. The villagers were horrified yet hesitant, caught between suspicion and social norms that discouraged intervention in marital affairs. Elizabeth's condition worsened, but with no formal support system or police forces known today, her plight remained largely invisible. Then, one frosty evening in late December, Thomas mysteriously disappeared. No one knew if he had fled, died, or been the victim of some sinister vengeance. The sudden absence left Elizabeth alone with growing fears and unanswered questions. Her neighbors, once indifferent, now viewed her with a mix of pity and suspicion. That suspicion intensified when a local farmer stumbled upon Thomas's body. It was hidden in a shallow grave beside the nearby river, his death marked by brutal wounds that suggested foul play. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small village. Attention shifted swiftly from Elizabeth's suffering to her potential involvement or knowledge of the murder. The authorities were summoned, and the investigation commenced amidst mounting gossip and fear. Elizabeth, once the victim, now found herself the prime suspect in a grisly crime. The story of the woman who sought stability but fell into terror was only just beginning to unravel in ways no one could anticipate. This tragic beginning seeds a complex tale of violence, deception, and the desperate fight for survival under unforgiving social laws. If you want to uncover how Elizabeth's fate intertwined with justice, terror, and secrets hidden beneath the placid surface of the village, hit subscribe and stay with us. Was Elizabeth a victim or something far more sinister? Share your first impressions in the comments. What would you have done if faced with her situation? The investigation into Thomas Harrington's death opened a grim chapter. Authorities, newly alerted to violent crime in the village, were inexperienced and determined to find answers quickly. Elizabeth Barry, now a widow in name but suspect in deed, became the focus. Her actions surrounding Thomas's disappearance drew intense scrutiny. Villagers recalled her eerie silence in the days before the body's discovery, alongside her inconsistent accounts. Some said she was terrified. Others whispered that she had motive and opportunity. The village constable began piecing together a timeline, speaking to neighbors, friends, and anyone who might shed light on the tragedy. Elizabeth's behavior was contradictory. At times, she appeared fragile and overwhelmed, weeping openly beside the fire. Yet at other moments, there was a cold steadiness that unnerved those who observed her. Her alibis for the day of the murder fluctuated under questioning. She claimed she was in the cottage alone sewing, but admitted to walking near the river before dusk, which put her dangerously close to the scene of the crime. The discovery of a blood-stained cloth in a nearby hedgerow complicated her story, suggesting a struggle. Despite the magistrate's efforts, material evidence was scarce, and the exact circumstances of Thomas's death remained elusive. Compounding Elizabeth's predicament was her social standing. As a woman of low status and limited education, she had few means to defend herself against accusations. The era's legal system was biased, often dismissing women's voices and placing heavy weight on male testimony. Elizabeth's distant relatives were reluctant to get involved, wary of attracting scandal or reprisals. She was left reliant on the goodwill of a few villagers and a local curate who believed her predicament warranted mercy. Witness testimonies revealed a turbulent relationship between the couple. Several neighbors spoke of heated arguments and public confrontations, making Thomas's violent tendencies no secret. One neighbor described hearing Elizabeth scream for help late one night, only to have the plea drowned by the howl of the wind. Another remembered seeing Thomas brandish a knife during a quarrel months earlier, a sign of escalating danger. These accounts painted a grim picture, but none conclusively proved Elizabeth's involvement in the murder, leaving the court to consider multiple possibilities. Amid this turmoil, Elizabeth's mental state began to deteriorate visibly. She was haunted by nightmares and paranoia. At one point, she locked herself in her home for several days, refusing to eat or speak except for cryptic mutterings to her cat. The local doctor, summoned to attend her, noted signs of deep psychological distress, something rare to diagnose or even acknowledge at the time. The village whispered of witchcraft and curses, common beliefs to explain unexplainable behavior. Elizabeth's isolation deepened, her reputation crumbling as fear and suspicion swelled like a dark tide. Nonetheless, the case against her remained circumstantial. Without a clear motive besides marital strife or direct evidence, the magistrates debated their path. Public opinion was divided. Some viewed Elizabeth as a tragic victim driven to defend herself, while others cast her as a cold murderer, capable of unimaginable cruelty. This split in sentiment ramped up tension in the community. Justice hung precariously in the balance, as the next steps would shape Elizabeth's future and potentially alter the course of local law enforcement practices, still in their infancy. The mystery deepened when a letter surfaced, allegedly from Thomas before his death, hinting at a secret involving Elizabeth that could ruin her beyond the murder accusation. The contents were ambiguous, yet incendiary enough to spark heated debates. Who had written the letter, and was it genuine? What dark secret did Thomas refer to? These questions threatened to pull the village into further chaos. Elizabeth's story thus moved from a simple crime scene into a labyrinth of secrets, betrayal, and the dangerous consequences of a life hidden behind lies. The unfolding investigation teetered on the brink of revealing a truth no one was prepared to confront. What secret could Elizabeth have harbored that made her marriage deadly? Subscribe now if you want to untangle this chilling web and hear what the letter uncovered next. Could Elizabeth's survival depend on exposing a secret even darker than murder itself? Leave a thought below on what motivations might lurk beneath Elizabeth's terrified facade. After the letter's shocking emergence, the focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. The correspondence, penned in a hesitant hand on torn paper, claimed Thomas had uncovered a secret about Elizabeth's past that threatened his life as much as hers. The magistrate ordered a thorough search of Elizabeth's cottage and possessions, hoping to find clues that would clarify this twisted puzzle. Hidden beneath floorboards and inside old chests were scraps of folded paper, half-burned letters, and faded personal notes, each hinting at a shadowed history. The documents revealed Elizabeth had once lived in a distant town under a different name. This discovery raised serious questions about her true identity and past. Who was she before becoming Elizabeth Berry? What circumstances forced her to cut ties and relocate? Investigators found records linking her to a scandal involving another man, a wealthy merchant who had mysteriously disappeared years earlier. Though the details were vague, the implication was clear. Elizabeth's history was intertwined with deception and perhaps foul play. This revelation complicated the narrative further, challenging the village's simplistic notions of victim and culprit. Rumors spread rapidly, fueled by villagers' fears and imaginations. Some whispered Elizabeth had been involved in the merchant's disappearance, while others speculated she fled to escape social disgrace. The magistrate struggled to piece together facts from fiction, aware that hysteria could distort justice. Elizabeth herself remained mostly silent, neither confirming nor denying the claims, her eyes avoiding direct questions. Amid this storm of suspicion, the local curate, Reverend Langdon, became a rare voice of support. He advocated for mercy and thorough examination rather than quick condemnation. He sought to ensure Elizabeth received a proper hearing, demanding the court consider mental health and social pressures. His interventions drew criticism from more pragmatic officials who prioritized swift resolution over compassion. This tug-of-war exposed the fragile nature of 18th-century justice, shaped more by social standing and personal biases than impartial inquiry. The investigation uncovered another startling fact. A neighbor testified that on the night Thomas disappeared, two figures had been seen arguing near the River Elizabeth, and a man unknown to the village. This witness's description was vague, but suggested a stranger's involvement. Who was this shadowy figure? Could there be a wider conspiracy or hidden vendettas at play? The mystery deepened, introducing new layers to the already complex case. With mounting evidence and growing public pressure, the magistrate convened a formal inquest. The villagers gathered, eager for answers, but divided in allegiance. The inquest exposed tensions as testimonies contradicted one another, and the scarcity of hard proof frustrated all. Elizabeth's defense was minimal. She struggled to navigate the hostile courtroom, unfamiliar with legal procedures and faced with overwhelming scrutiny. Throughout the proceedings, Elizabeth's demeanor fluctuated amidst desperately pleading innocence. At others, distant and resigned. Observers perceived a woman crushed by fate, yet harboring an unspoken resilience. As the inquest drew to a close, the verdict remained uncertain, but the future looked grim. The court's decision would not only determine Elizabeth's life, but set a precedent on how women accused of violent crimes were treated. As the inquest ended and Elizabeth awaited the verdict, A sudden twist emerged, the discovery of new evidence that promised to upend the entire case. What was it, and how would it reshape the truth about Elizabeth Barry? The next phase of this harrowing saga beckoned. Stay subscribed to witness the shocking revelations and the desperate moves made in the name of survival. What would you do if shadows from your past threatened to consume your entire future? Share your thoughts below before we unravel the next chilling chapter. The unexpected evidence was a diary belonging to Thomas Harrington, discovered hidden in the hollow cavity of a cottage beam during a routine search. The pages, fragile and stained with years of neglect, presented a direct glimpse into his thoughts and actions in the weeks preceding his death. The diary painted Thomas not as a harmless husband, but as a man deeply involved in illicit dealings and obsessed with hidden secrets tied to Elizabeth. Entries described his growing paranoia and frightening suspicions about Elizabeth's past. He claimed repeatedly in writing that she was not the innocent woman everyone believed, insinuating involvement in crimes and betrayals that he feared would endanger them both. More chilling were his confessions to contemplating violence to protect himself from what he perceived as an imminent threat. The diary revealed a man unraveling mentally, but also planning premeditated actions, perhaps against Elizabeth, but possibly others as well. The diary's publication in court sent shockwaves through the village and the legal arena. For the first time, concrete evidence suggested a motive for murder stemming from fear and desperation on Thomas's part. The entries hinted at a possible plot to silence Elizabeth or cover up darker secrets, but the precise details remained disturbingly vague. The diary complicated the prosecution's case, introducing reasonable doubt about who was truly the victim. Elizabeth's defense seized the moment, arguing the diary corroborated her claims of abuse and justified self-defense. They portrayed Thomas as a man consumed by his demons, whose presence was a source of terror rather than security. The jury, however, remained divided. Many villagers were unwilling to accept such a narrative, clinging instead to the belief that Elizabeth had orchestrated Thomas's murder to escape her tarnished past. Meanwhile, the magistrate faced mounting pressure to deliver a verdict that balanced law, evidence, and public sentiment. The case had evolved into a spectacle revealing societal tensions around gender, power, and class. For many, Elizabeth represented more than an individual accused of crime-esh, embodied fears about women stepping outside, expected roles, and the dangers lurking in seemingly peaceful rural life. Behind the courtroom scenes, Elizabeth's condition waxed and waned. She was subjected to harsh interrogations, faced with long nights of confinement and limited access to allies. Yet, fragments of her private resilience shone through secret notes to the Reverend Langdon, moments of clarity when she asserted her innocence and threatened to expose those orchestrating a deeper conspiracy. These hints suggested Elizabeth was acutely aware of forces beyond the immediate crime influencing her fate. The case took another dark turn when an old woman, known as Mrs. Pritchard, unexpectedly stepped forward. Claiming to have witnessed key events years earlier, but too fearful to speak, she revealed a tangled web of deception involving Thomas and a wider criminal network trafficking stolen goods and blackmail secrets. Elizabeth's association with these networks had been indirect but perilous. Mrs. Pritchard's testimony forced the court to confront the possibility that Elizabeth's crime was entangled in an underworld far more dangerous than anyone imagined. As the trial edged toward conclusion, the stakes could not have been higher. Would the court condemn Elizabeth Barry to death, or would hidden truths finally shine a light on justice's complexities? The village waited in breathless suspense at the verdict, poised to shake not just one life, but the community's very sense of order and morality. If you want to uncover the courtroom drama that concluded this haunting case and the final shocking verdict, remain with us. What does true justice look like when a woman's entire existence is a battlefield? Comment below with what verdict you expect before we reach the climax. The court's decision was delivered on a bleak spring afternoon in 1730. The village gathered outside the courthouse, whispering anxiously as the judges ascended the bench. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was stark. Elizabeth Barry was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to a lengthy term in prison, rather than death, a surprising act of clemency for the era. This sentence reflected the ambiguous nature of the evidence and the complex interplay of sympathy, fear, and desire for order among the jurors and magistrates. Elizabeth's imprisonment was harsh, as 18th century prisons were places of severe deprivation. She was confined in a cold, damp cell in a county jail, far from the life she knew. The conditions tested her will as she endured months of isolation, meager rations, and little communication with the outside world. Yet Elizabeth's spirit, though battered, remained unbroken. Occasional letters to Reverend Langdon spoke of her hope for vindication and the desire to expose the shadowy figures who had manipulated truth for their ends. During these dark months, another figure emerged, Samuel Hollis, a young lawyer fascinated by the case. Hollis began reviewing trial records and speaking discreetly with those involved in the investigation. He discovered overlooked inconsistencies in witness testimonies and procedural errors that cast doubt on the conviction's fairness. His persistence brought renewed attention to the case, igniting debates in legal circles about women's rights, evidentiary standards, and the potential for miscarriages of justice. Parallel to these developments, Elizabeth's reputation transformed. In prison, she was no longer merely the accused. She became a symbol of societal failure as the dangers of judging women without a voice and the consequences of hidden social corruption. Visitors described her as composed and articulate, her demeanor contrasting sharply with the fearful woman first arrested. Elizabeth steadfastly denied all allegations beyond defending herself, insisting that someone else orchestrated Thomas's death. The final twist came when Samuel Hollis uncovered a crucial confession from a man named James Cartwright, a known associate of Thomas Harrington. Cartwright admitted involvement in Thomas's murder, motivated by a debt dispute and fear exposure of illicit activities. This confession undermined the foundation of Elizabeth's conviction and suggested she had been a scapegoat. The revelation sparked calls for her release and posed uncomfortable questions about the roles of power, corruption, and gender in 17th and 18th century justice. Authorities reluctantly reopened the case, allowing for a re-examination of Elizabeth's arrest and trial. The new evidence could not erase the trauma she had endured, but it held the promise of formal exoneration. Elizabeth's plight became a cause célèbre among reformers seeking to improve legal protections for women and the impoverished. Her story exposed brutal truths about rural life and justice, and her time truths invisible beneath everyday rhythms. The community where it all unfolded grappled with the fallout. Relationships fractured. Some sympathized deeply with Elizabeth, while others clung to the original narrative of guilt. Her case sparked debates that echoed beyond the village, influencing early 18th century discussions on law, gender, and morality. Elizabeth Barry's name became synonymous with both tragedy and resiliency, a testament to a life ensnared by secrets and societal cruelty. Subscribe now if you want to understand how Elizabeth's story ended and what legacy it left behind for future generations. And tell us, does justice ever truly prevail in cases like these? We will reveal the final resolutions next. Elizabeth Barry's ordeal reached its final chapter following the reopening of her case. With James Cartwright's confession taken into account, the court issued a formal review. After careful re-investigation, it was ruled that Elizabeth had acted in self-defense against an abusive husband, and that she was wrongfully convicted. The official exoneration came nearly 3 years after her initial imprisonment, symbolizing a rare victory against a flawed system that so often punished the vulnerable. Upon release, Elizabeth returned not to the quiet safety of her village, but to a life marked by the scars of trauma, public scrutiny, and social alienation. Many neighbors continued to view her with suspicion or pity, unwilling or unable to fully reconcile her name with the events that had unfolded. Records show she lived for several more decades in relative obscurity, taking up work as a midwife and quietly supporting other women marginalized by society's harsh rules. Her story, whispered in countless retellings, became enshrined as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the brutal limits imposed on women and the unseen violence hidden behind closed doors. The case of Elizabeth Barry raised important early questions about domestic abuse, legal fairness, and the capacity for women to defend themselves in a world stacked against them. It highlighted the dangerous intersection of poverty, gender, and law in a system unprepared for the complexities of human suffering. Historians now look back at her life as emblematic of the broader struggles faced by women in early modern England. Although justice was eventually served through exoneration, it came too late to restore the years she lost to fear and incarceration. Portraits of Elizabeth from that era are non-existent. Only court documents, letters, and trial notes remain, offering fragmented insight into a life shaped by violence, resilience, and the quest for dignity. Beyond the historical facts, Elizabeth's case challenges us to reconsider the narratives accepted in the past and acknowledge the untold suffering of those silenced by social and legal repression. Her story ripples through the centuries, a haunting chronicle of survival amid cruelty and a call to confront injustice wherever it appears. The chilling truth behind Elizabeth Barry's historical crime remains a powerful lesson. While her name faded from everyday memory, the echoes of her struggle helped pave the way for more just treatment of women within the law and society. Thank you for following this dark and compelling journey. What do you think life was truly like for Elizabeth after her release? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below.